So, hello once again, ladies and gentlemen. So, I don't know if you have seen this guy on internet. He goes by the channel Let's Talk Religion. I don't know what his credentials are, but he made a video, Did Jesus Exist? And this guy with another guy, useful charts. So they are atheists and they are trying to push their atheist agenda on other people. And they try to disprove uh, the existence of a historical Jesus by the historicity method. So the historical method. So well, let's see how far they go. So I'm not going to play the whole video because you see that it is 26 minutes long, and let me tell you, this is 26 minutes of, how do you say, hypocrisy. 26 minutes of I don't know what to say. So this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, but let's see what he says. So let's see here.
Looking at the history of humanity, there are a lot of people who could be...
Actually, I'm gonna skip, because he's gonna bore sometimes. So let's listen from here what he wants to say.
...in the world, including, of course, Christianity, Islam, and the Baha'i faith, but Jesus can also be quite an elusive figure. And different people often tend to have very different ideas and views about who he was, if he was, and what he stood for. It is a greatly debated topic among historians today as well, and of course there's disagreement here too.
Now listen to what he says. He says that Jesus is an elusive figure, someone about whom not much is known, and scholars all disagree. Now, not everything what he said, so this is all in the file, what things he said. So if we apply to the New Testament as we should, the same sort of criteria as we should, so you have the whole quotation here, you can pause and read it, and then Will Durant, a historian, writer, and philosopher, he wrote that a few simple men, the gospel writers, should in one generation have invented so powerful and appealing a personality, so lofty in ethic, and so inspiring a vision of human brotherhood, would be a miracle far more incredible than any recorded in the Gospels. And this guy says that historians, my goodness, I don't know what to say. All critical historians, without a doubt, know and believe that Jesus of Nazareth was a real man who lived and died in time attributed to him in the Gospels. Now, let's see what he says. Another thing, he says something about getting the narratives right. So, okay, let's see.
But it is, of course, a very interesting subject and will be the main theme for our discussion in this video. Who was Jesus of Nazareth? I like Jesus, according to the way he is described.
Well, let's skip and see what he has to say, a little bit further.
In the Gospel, that's precisely describing the actual life or extreme Christianity's perception and understanding of who Jesus was, but this is by no means the only perspective.
So why can't this be the only perspective? Why other people are thinking? Because everybody is trying to grab Jesus. He's so great a personality that everyone wants to have him, so this is, I don't know what to say.
Jesus.
Now, here is another theory of his. Listen to what he says.
This was in fact a psychedelic mushroom, or rather that the figure of Jesus is a kind of metaphor that represents a mushroom that provided enlightenment.
I actually searched that book, and that book has the worst scores on all the online stores, and that was, a disaster. So people said that was a literary disaster, and he's considering those writings. I mean, come on. When you're saying that you want to consider history, consider history, Don't go to useless depictions. So I don't know, there's too much biasness here. There's too much biasness. Now listen to what he says here.
Perspectives, how can we know which one is the most accurate? Well, to put it simply, we can't.
Why can't we? Why just can't we? Actually, we can, and he made this, this video with collaboration with useful charts and more, this al-Muqaddimah. So I have their video right here, and he actually gives the criteria, how to know if something was historically accurate or not. So this is his clip about this. So how do we know that anyone in history actually really existed? And for sure, listen what he says.
Textual sources. And by textual sources, I don't mean a few words carved into stone. I mean lengthy works of literature, usually written first on parchment and then later copied onto paper and made into books. This is where things get a bit tricky because when it comes to ancient history, we often get textual sources that differ from one another when it comes to what actually happened. This leads some people to conclude that there's no way of knowing the truth.
Just like this guy. And now what the guy with whom he did the collaboration video is going to say something.
And that it's just a matter of arbitrarily choosing who you want to believe. But this is not the case. Scholars have developed a method called the historical method for determining which sources are more likely than others to be true. Here are some of the things that they consider. First, does the source match?
And then he shows, archaeological record, multiple sources, and sources biased or not, how much time passed. So these are some criteria. So we can actually know, what genre of writing was used. But anyways, I debunked this video as well. But you see, they are both actually contradicting each other just to push their agenda. And what's their agenda? To disprove religion. So sorry guys, but history is full of facts.
The best kind of evidence for a historical person like this is, of course, direct material evidence from the person, him or herself. It's things like a house, objects that the person owned, or literary remains like books directly written by the person.
Okay, so he says that direct material evidence, house or something, books written by the person. It's very interesting that the useful charts guy who did the video about Moses, he said that the books written by the person himself cannot be considered history. So, hypocrisy much? That's very interesting. Now, let's talk about this direct material evidence, because he's going to say in the video later on that we couldn't find anything about Jesus. So, you need to realize, and you can, search any archaeological person out and ask him. Archaeology doesn't approve or disprove anything. It just gives credibility. And we are going to talk about the credibility of archaeology in a few seconds.
If none of this exists, we have to rely on secondary sources, such as stories about the person told by others, eyewitness accounts, and the like. The more material, the better, of course, and the closer to the actual event in time, the better. Contemporary sources that come directly from the period of a person's life, so from a person's lifetime, are of course the most reliable. Palestine couldn't read or from.
So there is another argument he says. So let's listen what he says.
Jesus' own lifetime, there is nothing here either. Now, this isn't that surprising, since of course most people in first century Palestine couldn't read or write, and Jesus during his life would probably not have been famous enough for him to be mentioned in any kind of official documents either. But this lack of evidence is indeed problematic, and there are many who argue today that Jesus never actually existed as a historical person, that he was a later construct by Christian writers. And this is a somewhat serious idea or theory that can't be overlooked completely, since there is at least some merit to this idea. However, the fact is that...
Okay, let's hear. Now this is another person, so he will tell you, something about this guy.
Let's now read the words of Magistrate Pliny the Younger, who was the governor of Bithynia in Asia Minor. The Christians were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before it was light, when they sang in alternate verses a hymn to Christ as to a God, and bound themselves by a solemn oath not to any wicked deeds, but never to commit any fraud, theft, or adultery, never to falsify their word, nor deny a trust when they should be called upon to deliver it up. After which it was their custom to separate, and then reassemble to partake of food, the food of an ordinary and innocent kind. Later, Pliny writes a letter to Emperor Trajanus, and he specifically says that the teachings of the Christians were, open quotes, excessive and contagious superstition, close quotes. He also says that Christians attracted people of all social classes, of all genders, and of all ages. Now let's read the reply from Emperor Trajanus. The method you have pursued, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those denounced to you as Christians is extremely proper. It is not possible to lay down any general rule which can be applied as the fixed standard in all cases of this nature. No search should be made for these people. When they are denounced and found guilty, they must be punished, with the restriction, however, that when the party denies himself to be a Christian and shall give proof that he is not, that is, by adoring our gods, he shall be pardoned on the ground of repentance, even though he may have formerly incurred suspicion. Informations without the accuser's name subscribed must not be admitted in evidence against anyone, as it is introducing a very dangerous precedent, and by no means agreeable to the spirit of the age. Now, this is extremely significant. First and foremost, what does the emperor mean when he says, the method you have pursued, my dear Pliny, in sifting the cases of those denounced to you as Christians is extremely proper? Well, you have to understand one thing about both Pliny the Younger and Tacitus. Both of them had the duty of supervising trials of Christians, which is precisely why they documented it. So in this letter, Emperor Trajanus is saying, yes, very good, you're doing well. They need to be stopped. But even more interesting is what he says about his gods, and this really gives us the first perspective as the first part of those two introductory lines that I mentioned at the beginning, the perspective of the Romans. Now this is the religious perspective of the Romans. When people tell you, why didn't the Romans do something if there was a man preaching in Judea such as Jesus, why don't we have much more information about it? Well, the answer is, as you can read from the letter, the words of the emperor himself, from the point of view of the Romans, religious freedom was something that it was always granted. In other words, the Romans didn't care what god you were worshipping in your lands. Once it became a Roman province, all they wanted to make sure is that it remained under Roman control. But a certain degree of religious freedom was always given. So we shouldn't imagine that to the Romans it really meant much that a preacher was going around.
So here is your answer. Let's talk religion. Okay, here's another thing that he's talking about. Let's listen to what he says.
You have are convincing enough that scholars think that this is the most likely option. Now, as I said, there are no contemporary sources from the time of the life of Jesus, but some sources start to appear not too long afterwards, and the earliest sources for the life of Jesus is actually some of the books of the New Testament itself. Of course, based on the criterion I talked about earlier, the New Testament accounts would definitely fall under the category of biased, but this doesn't mean that they should be discarded completely.
Very interesting that he says that they are biased. Okay, so now let's see if he says that they are biased. Are they really biased, or are they really true? So here it is. I thought that you might read for yourself, so not to watch on the screen and hear me talking. So one prominent archaeologist carefully examined Luke's references to 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands, finding not a single mistake. And then about John and Mark. There have been several discoveries that have shown John to be very accurate. So this is from a book that I took, that's why it's written, McRae pointed out. For example, John 5, 1-15 recalls how Jesus healed an invalid by the pool of Bethesda. John provides the detail that the pool had 5 porticos. For a long time, people cited this as an example of John being inaccurate, but because no such place had been found. But more recently, the pool of Bethesda has been excavated. It lies maybe 40 feet below ground, and sure enough, there were 5 porticos, which means colonnaded porches or walkways, exactly as John had described. And you have other discoveries: the pool of Siloam from John 9:7, Jacob's well from John 4:12, the probable location of stone pavement near the Jaffa Gate where Jesus appeared before Pilate in John 19:13, even Pilate's own identity, all of which lent historical credibility to John's Gospel and all the Gospels. So, my dear friend, you're saying that they were unbiased, you are biased, and you need to come to faith in Jesus Christ so that he might forgive you for showing biasness towards him.
There's there could be a bias in the opposite direction, but nonetheless, we have sources from outside the Bible, which is also very significant. The earliest and most significant of these is by the Jewish historian Josephus. He is often considered one of the most significant Jewish figures of.
We not only have Josephus, so we have Paulius Cornelius Tacitus, we have Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus, then Josephus. So we have so many sources, and then we have Pliny the Younger, Thallus, Phlegon of Tralles, Phileo, Celsius. So all these people we have. So I don't know what he's talking about. Seriously, go read history, man. So what are you doing here? Okay, now this is about Josephus, and he says that it was written by an early Christian, writer. He tempered with the work of Josephus. This is partially true, but not wholly. For example, this first line, about this time there lived Jesus, a wise man. That phrase is not normally used of Jesus by Christians, so it seems authentic for Josephus. But the next phrase says, if indeed one ought to call him a man. This implies Jesus was more than human, which appears to be an interpolation. So it goes on to say, for he was one who wrought surprising feats. So, are you following me? Startling deeds, okay, and was a teacher of such people as accept the truth gladly or with pleasure. He won over many Jews and many of the Greeks. That seems to be quite in accord with the vocabulary Josephus uses elsewhere, and it's generally considered authentic. But then there's this unambiguous statement, he was the Christ, or the Messiah. Now, that seems to be an interpolation. It's unlikely that Josephus would have flatly said Jesus was the Messiah here, when elsewhere he merely said that he was considered to be Messiah by his followers. The next part of the passage, which talks about Jesus' trial and crucifixion, and the fact that his followers still loved him, is unexceptional and considered genuine. Then there's this phrase, on the third day he appeared to them restored to life. Again, this is a clear declaration of belief in the resurrection, and thus it is unlikely that Josephus wrote it. So these three elements seems to have been interpolation. Now what's the bottom line? That the passage in Josephus probably was originally written about Jesus, although without those 3 points. But even so, Josephus corroborates important information about Jesus, that he was martyred leader of the church in Jerusalem, and that he was a wise teacher who had been established a wide and lasting following, despite the fact that he had been crucified under Pilate at the instigation of some of the Jewish leaders. Now, how significant are Josephus' quotations about Jesus, without the interpolation? They are highly significant, especially since his accounts of the Jewish war have been proved to be very accurate. For example, they have been corroborated through archaeological excavations at Masada, as well as by historians like Tacitus. He is considered to be a pretty reliable historian, and his mentioning of Jesus is considered extremely important. So here you are, boom. Now there is another from Tacitus. So he, says here, Nero falsely accused those whom the populace called Christians. The author of this name, Christ, was put to death by the procurator Pontius Pilate, while Tiberius was emperor. But the dangerous superstition, though suppressed for the moment, broke out again, not only in Judea, the origin of this evil, but even in the city of Rome. So he says that this is reliable, but it doesn't mention Jesus, it only mentions his followers. But my question is that this dangerous superstition, which suppressed by the death of Jesus Christ, broke out again. Why? If you kill a person, his followers don't multiply. His followers, they leave him because everybody is scared for his own life. So how can you say, so it is impossible. Only from this quote we know that Jesus really existed and he was killed and he rose again. So it is so many. I cannot go on, so on, disabling all the evidences that he says, because it's really too much, and the historical criteria, it's too too much. If you want to know for yourself, I would advise you to go here, Metatron, and watch his video. And there is another video about Jesus's resurrection from the infographics show. So they actually use the historical method without any biasness. So guys, please don't fall into things like these. I don't know from where these people came and why they are trying to push their idea. So you don't use history to push your idea. You use history for your ideas to be pushed. And if Jesus Christ was, then you accept him. You don't live in denial. So hopefully you like this video. I'm sorry I cannot dismantle all of this video because it's 26 minutes long. So, and I'm already tired collecting evidences for Jesus. Can you imagine? There are so many evidences. Only one thing I will mention in the end. Why do we use AD and BC in dates? Do you know why? Because everything in the history can be doubted. Except the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It did happen. Or the death, if you can say. But still, he died, he resurrected. So, I don't know how to end this. I can go on and on telling about Jesus. Okay, so stay tuned for next time. If you like this video, please do subscribe. And I'm gonna start doing this, dismantling all these videos. So if you like my videos, if you have any other videos you think is not accurate, you let me know. And by the grace of God, I'll dismantle it. Okay guys, see you. God bless you.